Hello, my name is Micah Kimbrough, and this is my presentation on the horrors of nuclear war and how to survive it. This particular version was last updated on March 13th, 2019. Okay. The prerequisites for this presentation is the only prerequisites for understanding this presentation should only be high school chemistry, physics, and algebra. If you do not have these, then maybe you might have trouble understanding the concepts, but you might be able to understand the basics and get something out of the presentation anyway. So those are the prerequisites, but even if you don't have those, you should get something out of it. The purpose of this presentation is to pass on information so you can make an informed decision in such an event and help you plan if you wish to. It is meant to pass on ideas in one presentation and to be self-contained. In other words, it is supposed to be a thorough and accurate, and is not meant to be overwhelming and complicated, but this type of event by its nature is complicated. Take away what you can, and if needed, watch over and over if necessary. Hopefully it can be used to help you survive. It does contain some opinions. I do have another purpose for this presentation besides trying to take some fear and panic from you during such an event. And what that means is if that type of event happened, it's going to be scary, and it's going to cause a lot of stress and tension, and some people might even panic. But it is to give you such a thorough presentation that you are able to exclude slides from your presentation, and then it gives you the confidence to deal with the known so you can deal with the unknown. So I hope it could be passed along to everybody in the United States without cost to help them prepare just in case. It is more than an outline, but less than a book. It reads like a pretty much is pretty close to a book, but it is like a PowerPoint presentation, but it's pretty thorough. So hopefully you can get something out of it. I divided it into 5 sections. Section 1 is what is radiation. Section 2 is fallout and types of blasts. Section 3 is radiation detectors. And Section 4 are risks, biological effects, and protection. And Section 5 is the summation. Section 1, what is radiation? An atom is made up of essentially 3 particles: electrons, protons, and neutrons. The electrons orbit a nucleus that is in the center and contains the protons and neutrons. For example, a stable carbon atom contains 6 orbiting electrons and a nucleus that contains 6 protons and 6 neutrons. And here's a picture of this is a picture of a typical atom. As you can see, the nucleus has the protons and the neutrons with the electrons orbiting the nucleus. It's a very simplified model. It is to some degree a little inaccurate, but for a lot of people, to help them understand, this is a simplified model of what actually is in a atom. A stable atom, we talked about a little bit earlier, was the nucleus of a stable atom has the same number of protons and neutrons in the nucleus. For example, a carbon 12 atom has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. This atom is at a stable energy state. So as you can see, the number of protons and neutrons are equal. Okay. An unstable atom has a different number of protons and neutrons. An atom does not want to stay at this configuration because of being in a higher energy state, so it goes through neutron decay. For example, a carbon-14 atom has 6 protons and 8 neutrons. The 2 extra neutrons is what makes an atom radioactive and is called an isotope of carbon. Many atoms on the periodic table have isotopes. Almost all the elements on the periodic table. I can't think of one that doesn't, but they do have isotopes. Carbon-14 is just one of them. Yeah, carbon-14 is just one of them. And it is used, to carbon date bones and stuff. That's how we determine whether or not how old a dinosaur is. So the types of energies released during a nuclear explosion. There is the neutron decay, which gives off radiation. X-rays, usually designated as soft X-rays, and there's a little bit difference between a soft X-ray and a hard X-ray, and you'll see that on the electromagnetic spectrum, that soft X-ray has a little less energy than a hard X-ray, but it still has high energy. Free neutrons are neutrons from a cascading fission reaction that escapes, which we'll go into later. Okay. In neutron decay, or during neutron decay, there are 3 types of radiation that are given off. You have the alpha radiation, the beta radiation, and the gamma radiation. You've probably heard of all 3 of those, but we'll go in a little detail. An alpha radiation is a helium nucleus. It is low penetrating. A piece of paper or clothes can stop the helium atom, or actually the helium nucleus. So that's a correction. It's a helium nucleus. Not usually dangerous unless taken internally in the lungs or digestive system. So that's alpha radiation. Beta radiation is an electron. It is somewhat penetrating. It can go through about a centimeter of tissue. It still can cause damage to the skin, tissue, and can cause burns, etc. It can cause something that looks like a sunburn if you're exposed to it externally. Okay. Gamma radiation. Gamma radiation is a photon of electromagnetic energy. It is highly penetrating, can go through the body, and it takes something dense to protect you, like concrete or a decent amount of earth to stop it. So that helps you understand that it goes through small amounts of material. Though if you have a lot of dense material, you can shield yourself from it. So that's one of the shielding things that we'll talk about a little later. It can cause damage to genetic material inside of a cell, causing the cell to die or to become cancerous. Usually you have mechanisms to help prevent cancer, but when you're exposed to lots of gamma radiation, it causes many cells to die, which is hard to come back from. So that's when you get radiation sickness, or even worse. But usually your body is exposed to gamma radiation, and the cell can protect itself, or it just dies, so it doesn't grow into a cancer. And you do get exposed to things like gamma radiation from naturally occurring things, and even man-made things, but it's usually not very much to cause you a lot of damage. So X-rays. X-rays is a photon of electromagnetic energy, like gamma rays. It is highly penetrating, can go through the body, and it takes something dense to protect you, like concrete or a decent amount of earth to stop it. Can cause damage to genetic material inside of a cell, causing the cell to die or become cancerous. But as you're aware, you can have an X-ray and it not cause you cancer. That's because, like I said earlier, was that your body is good at protecting its genetic material, and there are different ways the cell will protect you from creating DNA that is messed up. So to do that, it dies, or the DNA actually gets repaired. So to some extent, things like that won't small amounts of it won't kill you or hurt you. So, and here's a electromagnetic spectrum. As you can see on the right, oops, okay, there we go. On the right are the high energy rays or photons, and then on the left they're lower energy, and the lower energy pretty much shouldn't cause any damage to, because as you can see, it's radio waves, TV, and radio. So we don't believe it to be harmful, but excuse me. But as the wavelengths get shorter and shorter, there's more energy, and at the far right, you have your X-ray, your gamma rays, and your X-rays. As you can see, the soft X-rays are a little bit to the left of the hard X-rays, and they're a little less energetic. And as you can also see the visible light where it falls. That's an example of where everything lands on the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay, free neutrons. There are extra high energy neutrons that are produced in a cascading fission reaction. And we're going to be talking about a cascading fission reaction a lot, because that's what causes fission and the explosion in a nuclear bomb. So in a cascading fission reaction in a nuclear explosion that are not used in producing the nuclear explosion because they exit and are no longer in the cascade, so they leave, they're expelled from the bomb before they are used in the bomb. The extra neutrons can combine with the contents of the environment, which can make that material radioactive. Okay. Half-life. Half-life. Because a isotope is at a higher energy level, it wants to get to a more stable state. It therefore gives off energy, neutrons, and particles that make it more stable. The half-life is the length of time for the amount of radiation through neutron decay to be given off by an isotope to decrease that by half. That's why it's called half-life. The energy, so if you take a reading, say right now, and then you measure it again, the time, the length of time, the half-life that you're given for that particular radioactive isotope, and you take another reading, half of that energy is gone. So that's why they call it half-life. Though the energy is being given off, of course, even between the time, the initial time and the future time, the half-life time, it's always being given off, but we only give the half-life time. Half-life. The half-life of plutonium-239, which is used in the bomb, is 24,110 years. And the half-life of uranium-235, which is also used in the bomb, is 700 million years. Other isotopes or fission products have shorter or longer half-lives depending on what is produced. There is a graphic later showing you about fission products. Okay, when uranium-235 or plutonium-239 gives off its neutrons, it also gives off fission products or another, and it goes through neutron decay. All the fission products are also radioactive. Okay, uranium. Uranium-235 is used in making of a nuclear bomb. However, uranium-238 makes up over 99% of the uranium rock excavated. The most common way to get the uranium-235 out of a large amount of uranium rock requires many sophisticated centrifuges. It is not the only way to make uranium-235, but I believe it is the most common. Even the centrifuges require a certain degree of expertise to use because they are rotating very, very, very fast. And if they are not calibrated correctly, they will fly apart with great force, causing a great deal of damage. Okay, plutonium-239 is not found naturally. It is a byproduct of a nuclear reactor, plus can be produced a number of other ways. The nuclear reactor can benefit others by producing electricity for homes and businesses, so radioactivity can be used for peaceful purposes. The U.S., however, worries that a terrorist nation that has a nuclear reactor for peaceful purposes can use the plutonium created in a nuclear reactor to make weapons-grade plutonium. So that's why everybody's scared that if a terrorist nation does develop nuclear power or has nuclear power, that they can develop nuclear bombs. And being a terrorist nation, there's no telling what they would do with them if they got them. Okay, section 2, fallout and types of blasts. Okay, this is a picture of a characteristic mushroom cloud, like you see on TV, in the movies, or any, that's what it doesn't start off that way, but it ends up being like a mushroom cloud. And if you're not blinded by the initial explosion, then you would probably see a mushroom cloud like that. It may be the only sign that there has been a nuclear explosion. Okay, fission reaction. Okay, and during fission, when one neutron is knocked out of the nucleus of an isotope, it can knock out 2 or 3 neutrons out of an isotope next to it. It really depends on the efficiency of the reaction. This can set up a self-containing cascade reaction and is what causes the release of energy, the great amount of release of energy in a nuclear explosion. Much more energy is released from a nuclear explosion than from a chemical explosion. That's what makes a nuclear explosion so horrible, is the amount of energy that is released is so devastating. A stored core produces less fissions to produce a sustained cascade reaction, and this is how it is stored on a bomb or in storage. An atomic bomb uses a fission type reaction to cause the explosion. So what that is saying is that there are not enough generation of neutrons from a fission core on a bomb to create a critical reaction causing a nuclear explosion. That's how they can store it. That the actual nuclear explosion occurs when the implosion of a bomb causes it to have enough neutrons given off to create a self-sustaining cascade reaction. And without that self-sustaining cascade reaction, there will be no nuclear explosion. And here is a picture or a graphic is of a fission reaction and its byproducts, which are radioactive. Okay, here's your fission products. So a neutron comes in and hits the nucleus. Okay, which is hard to do because that nuclear nucleus is very, very small. So you have to have a lot of neutrons to be given off for for this to occur. And then, as you can see, it goes in, it hits the nucleus, and then you have here shown here are 3 neutrons given off and 2 fission products. Okay, and those fission products are radioactive, and the neutrons will go on to hit another target nucleus, and so on till you get a cascading reaction. And without that cascading reaction, the bomb will fizzle, or it won't be a nuclear explosion. Here's what you can find in a bomb. There are 2 types of bombs that we usually talk about: a gun type and an implosion type. They use both of these types in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. The original one was a gun type, where a half of a sphere of uranium was on one side of the bomb, and another half was on the other side, and one half was shot off like a gun and hit the other half, and when that occurred, it caused a nuclear reaction. It wasn't very efficient because of the gun type is not a very efficient type of nuclear weapon for a number of reasons. In an implosion type bomb, the high explosive covering a pit. The pit is that spherical uranium or plutonium, a sphere, but it's hollow in the center, so it's called a pit. And it's in an implosion type bomb, the high explosive covering a pit is set up to go off at the same time and creates a spherical implosion. So it causes all of that uranium or plutonium to get closer and closer together, and as it gets closer and closer together, more and more of those neutrons are going to hit, statistically, they're going to hit more and more uranium or plutonium atoms, and creates a cascading reaction like we said before. When an explosion occurs, there are 2 forces at work. Correct. The implosion of the explosives and the explosion caused by the energy given off by the cascading reaction. If the bomb explodes outward faster than enough of the isotopes can go through the cascade, then the bomb fizzles and you get a poor explosion, or no explosion at all. No nuclear explosion. You get an explosion from the high explosives around it, but you don't get that cascading, that nuclear part of the explosion, because there's just not enough neutrons hitting enough of those nucleuses to create the cascading reaction. Tamper is used to slow down the reaction just enough so there are enough fissions to cause the nuclear explosions. Like I said, there's 2 opposing forces. One, the high explosives are pushing the nuclear material to become more and more dense, and as that is occurring, there's energy given off, and it wants to fly apart too. So you have those two opposing forces, and you have to calculate how that there will be enough neutrons flying around to cause that cascading reaction before it flies apart and will fizzle out. Neutron initiator used in an implosion explosion that when the implosion occurs, it compresses a small core, causing a deuterium or tritium gas in the center, creating more neutrons to produce, helping the explosion. Okay, now when we're talking about a neutron initiator, this is something else that makes it more efficient. And when you get a more efficient bomb, you're getting a bigger bomb. So you don't have to use as much uranium or plutonium. And of course, bigger bombs make bigger destruction, which is not good for us. But okay, there's actually a little that gas in the, like I said, the core or the pit is hollow, and they put something gas in there, and as that is compressed. Okay, a neutron generator creates fast-moving neutrons directed toward the isotope used in the bomb, which also helps the cascading reaction. Let's see. Okay, mirrors are used, and it's not your regular type of mirror like you look in the mirror when you get up and you have a reflection of yourself in that mirror. These mirrors are designed to reflect neutrons. Since this help keeps the neutrons available for the cascading reaction, it increases the efficiency of the bomb. Okay, so that's another way to make it more efficient, is to use this. They coat it with some type of metal, and that metal reflects the neutrons. So that helps keep the neutrons from being escaping into the atmosphere or outside the bomb. So it makes it more efficient that way. Okay. Here's some pictures of a typical atomic bomb, and here are a graphic of some of the things I was talking about. And let's see, your fast explosive, and then there should be slow explosive to help make it a spherical explosion and spherical implosion. Okay, then you have the forces pushing on the plutonium or uranium core, and what else? That's neutron initiator is in the center, and plutonium core and spherical shockwave compress the core, and then you have a tamper that helps. Well, it actually keeps the explosion spherical, and like I said, it keeps it from exploding apart. In a thermonuclear burst, there is a combination of a primary fission and a secondary fusion reaction. It causes a greater release of energy due to both of the reactions occurring. It is called a hydrogen bomb because hydrogen is used in the reaction. The hydrogen is provided by deuterium and tritium gas, and lithium-6 deuteride fuels the fusion reaction. Of course, I'm going to have a graphic of that, and this is what that is. It's a two-part. Here's your fission primary reaction right in here. This is your neutron generator. Okay, and this is your high explosives, and then you'll have high and slower explosive material, and it pushes it and it implodes. That's your plutonium pit, and your deuterium and tritium boost gas will be inside. So as that creates a fission reaction or a nuclear explosion, and that energy is used to create the fusion or the secondary reaction, which as you can see, the center is a uranium inner layer. See, the lithium deuteride is a fusion cell, and it's covering the uranium inner layer and then the uranium outer layer. Okay, in this particular one, you got two layers. They could be uranium-238 or uranium-235. It doesn't say which, but when the temperatures and the pressure is very high due to the fission explosion or the nuclear explosion over here, it will cause even 238 to go nuclear. So here's some of the another type of thermonuclear bomb. You got high, okay, they're calling these high explosive lenses, but that's not the same as the mirror I was talking about. The mirror would be the reflective casing right down here that I was talking about. Uranium-238 is the tamper of this fission bomb. And then you got tritium gas, and this is plutonium or uranium hollow core, or the pit. Remember I called it the pit earlier. And polystyrene foam, uranium-238 tamper, and this is going to be plutonium in here, spark plug they call that, and lithium-6 deuteride. And in one of the tests, the lithium-6, they had a little, they didn't really expect the lithium-6 to create such a large reaction, and that it made one of the bombs go off and was bigger than they expected, and that caused a lot of problem because they were closer to the bomb than they should have been, and that bomb went off, and you know, it was a lot more destructive. Okay, fallout. During a nuclear blast, the actual ground and objects on and near ground zero are vaporized. That's due to the heat. of course, this is more of a surface burst. Due to the heat and sucked up into a mushroom-like cloud, heated air rises. That's why you're going to have this mushroom cloud. You're going to have the explosion. You're going to have forces that create pressure, shock waves outward. But as it starts to cool, the heat of it's going to start cooling, and heat rises, so it's going to go up into the atmosphere is what I'm getting at. This debris is mixed with unspent nuclear material from the bomb. That means the uranium or the plutonium that's not used. Not 100% of the material that is in a bomb is used up in the nuclear explosion. So it's going to go be forced outward, and the products of fission, even the fission products are radioactive, are all bonded together when they cool. And that's talking about the debris is mixed with unspent nuclear material from the bomb and the products of fission, and are bonded together when they cool. That means that products of fission. What we're talking here is whatever was vaporized is going to, all of this is going to be mixed because it's so hot. It vaporizes, and all of this is going to be mixing in with each other, and some things are going to have radioactive material on it, or some of it's going to be created, and all of this is going to go up into the air. There are also many high-speed neutrons produced that can create radioactive isotopes in the debris. So some of that is made radioactive because those neutrons will. There's lots of neutrons floating around there, so it's going to cause some material, even if it's not radioactive, to become radioactive. As the temperature cools, the now radioactive debris falls to the ground as fallout. Fallout is spread over a large area due to the winds carrying the radioactive debris. The heavier debris falls out closer to the actual blast due to its heavy weight. However, the lighter debris can be carried over a larger area, and it can be carried for years if it's in the higher altitudes. So fallout can be in the upper atmosphere for a very long time. So it may take years for it to all come out of the atmosphere, and you have no more radioactive from bombs anyway in the atmosphere. Okay. Energy released in a fission reaction. About 1 pound of fissile material can release about 8 kilotons of energy. In a thermonuclear reaction, 1 pound of hydrogen isotope deuterium can release about 26 kilotons of energy. Okay, and that's what we're talking about here. Is this was the reactions in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. As I noted down at the bottom, remember these are dependent on a number of conditions like the isotopes used and the efficiency of the reaction. I believe these sizes were used in the bombs that were dropped on Japan during World War II. Given the higher efficiencies of the bombs now, they are more than likely now inaccurate. It's for demonstration purposes. So I was trying to give you an idea. This is what they used in Hiroshima. Was a smaller explosion, and then Nagasaki was the bigger explosion, and that's what that was. Blast characteristics. Okay, in the blast characteristics, you're going to have initial radiation, residual radiation, thermal energy, which is heat, overpressure, and a blast wave. Okay, and the note at the bottom says, remember, the characteristics are dependent on a lot of factors like the type of explosion, and I'm talking here also your gun type and your implosion type used, like the fission or the thermonuclear, whether it is an atomic bomb or a hydrogen bomb. So the following percentages are approximate, and we'll give you percentages for each of these in the following slides. So, and they're approximate. Overpressure and blast wave are sometimes combined. Actually, they're a lot of times combined and called a shock wave. Initial radiation and residual radiations are sometimes combined and just called radiation. The radiation from the bomb, for instance, they'll say that. So, but I have tried to separate them into these 5 blast characteristics. Secondary effects of a nuclear explosion can be earthquakes. The nuclear explosions cause waves in the interior and surface of the Earth, which could cause earthquakes. So you can keep that. And more than anything, if you drop a nuclear bomb, say in San Francisco or Los Angeles, you got your San Andreas fault down that goes through one of those cities. So if you're dropping one on one of those cities and you got that fault that goes through, and it can cause a secondary earthquake. Well, it's secondary to the nuclear explosion. Okay. Nuclear winter, if there is enough material, the theory is if there is enough material put into the atmosphere, it could block the sun's rays from reaching the earth, causing drops of temperature. And enough drop in the temperature, and you'll cause a perpetual winter. And I believe it was Carl Sagan who theorized that. And a lot of these are are theories and not necessarily been proven or unproven, if you ask me. So we'll go on. You should be aware of them, though, that these could be or will be some of the secondary effects, depending on, of course, how big the nuclear war would be. And in other words, if everybody used them rather than lose them, and you're going to have all of them shot off at once, rather than maybe 10 shot off by each country. So there's a lot. It depends in this type of discussion because there's so many factors that could play into the different things, like the efficiency of the bombs, the actually whether or not the nuclear bombs actually hit where they're aiming at, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of it depends. Where it's very appropriate to say it depends. Pooling of radioactivity in rivers, lakes, and oceans. Radioactivity could pool in bodies of water due to rain washing it out. Black rain is rain that falls to earth after an explosion, washing the fallout out of the sky, and it'll have burnt material and other things mixed in with that rain and making it look black, not clear like you usually would have rain. So if you're getting black rain, you're probably downwind of the nuclear explosion, and you're getting a lot of radioactive fallout in your area. So don't get that on you. It's probably highly radioactive and will do a lot of damage. Okay, famine. Due to the destruction of the infrastructure, crops will not be able to be delivered where they're needed or grown, because remember, your fallout will contaminate your topsoil. So anything that you plant will take up that radioactive isotopes, and that was one of the things about one of the islands in the Pacific Ocean that they had dropped thermonuclear bombs on, was that they waited a long time to let the indigenous population come back, and when they did come back, the area may not have been that radioactive, but the radioactivity became incorporated in their crops, and they were eating it, and they were getting sick. So a famine would be a likely secondary effect. Pandemic. Due to the biological effects of radiation and the destruction of the infrastructure, medicines will be hard to come by, and normal infections that you are normally able to fight off will probably kill us. Okay, say that after a nuclear war, the industrial areas are destroyed, and they can't make medicines. Well, you use what medicines they have around, and eventually you'll run out. But and because of that, you're going to if you get cut and you're probably not able to fight off that infection, and could kill you. And I don't want to say for sure it will kill you, but I'm saying it may be hard for your body to fight that off. And pandemics will probably be you'll probably have a few pandemics. Pestilence, without pesticides and fallout, insects may have full reign over what crops are left and have no check and balances. And what I mean by that is we use insecticides to help control the insects, so that the crops will grow and not be destroyed by insects and such. But if you don't have any pesticides, then what's going to happen is those insects are going to have a field day. So you'll probably have a major growth in the insect population, and then it'll die out when there's no more food left. So, and then you got famine. So the pestilence will probably cause the famine. Excuse me. So that's some of the secondary effects. Okay, initial radiation. It's about 5% of the total energy given off is given off as initial radiation. The initial radiation is the form of gamma rays and X-rays and is the result of uranium or plutonium fission. And that's pretty much what it is the gamma rays and X-rays that are, if you're standing close to a nuclear bomb, you will probably die from the gamma radiation or X-rays, but then you're probably close enough to the thermo energy and the other things, so it probably wouldn't matter. But okay, but that's what's given off in the initial radiation, and the secondary or residual radiation is what we're talking about, is fallout. Okay, about 10% of the energy is giving off as residual radiation. The residual radiation is a combination of unspent free uranium and plutonium plus the byproducts of fission, or the fusion products, byproducts of the fission fusion from the explosion, byproducts of fission products, or radioactive as well. Thermoradiation. About 35% of the total energy is given off at thermoradiation or heat. The thermoradiation is in the tens of millions of degrees in the fireball, equal to the center of the sun. Photons or light is given off, which can cause temporary or permanent blindness. Do not look at the explosion, because you'll become blind. And of course, it's probably on the second page. Thermal radiation that's given off by the explosion is the cause of materials to catch fire and cause residual fires. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. The to add is the thermal part of the nuclear explosion will cause a great amount. Well, combustible material, of course, will combust, especially if it's close to the center. But and they'll continually be it'll cause fires, which will remain. There's probably plenty of what you need is oxygen, fuel, and ignition source, and that's the ignition source. So, and there's probably going to be a lot of fuel, so there'll probably be a lot of fires. And these are some figures that I wanted to share with you. we'll go over a 500 kiloton nuclear bomb. That is probably about the size of the nuclear bombs in both the U.S.'s and Russia's nuclear arsenal are probably going between somewhere around the 500 kiloton bomb, maybe more. At 1 mile from the center of the explosion, of course, you're going to have even metals vaporize out to 1.4 miles. And at 2 miles, you're going to have melts metal. So even out to 2 miles, metals will be vaporizing and melting. Out to 2.8 miles, you're going to have from 2.0, well, it's right down there, 2.0 to 2.8 miles, metals are going to melt. And from 3.9 miles, rubbers and plastics melt and ignite. So even plastics are going to melt. 5.5 miles, wood chars and burns. And out to 8.5 miles, you'll get third degree burns and skin chars. That's not a very pleasant way to put that, but and then second degree burns and blistering out to 10.5, and out to 18.5 you're going to have first degree burns and skin reddens, which is like you'll get a sunburn. So a 500 kiloton explosion, you need to be at least probably about 20 miles away from it to not get significant damage, which would cause immediate death. So that's some of these. That's what this chart's for, is to help give you an idea. If the size of the bomb, if you're living within that certain amount of distance, you have to protect yourself from the thermal energy. And then, of course, we'll have another chart for the shock wave or the and such. This woman has burn patterns left from her clothes she was wearing. So it became hot, and what skin was exposed got burnt, and in between, the fabric, she was actually burned in between the fabric where the holes would be, and it left a mark or pattern on her back, and from the burns. Okay, this is a picture of the shadow people. The flash from the burst burned, and their shadow burned. Okay, the flash from the burst burned their shadow into the ground. Okay, so the amount of light that was given off kind of because the body was a little bit denser than the surrounding material. It was denser, it absorbed some of the energy and then thus left that shadow pattern. And so somebody was actually standing there when that explosion went off. And these are pictures from Hiroshima or Nagasaki. So these are this is shadow people from that explosion. Overpressure. About 50% of the energy from the blast creates the overpressure and blast wave. It creates an increase in pressure, usually given in pounds per square inch. Can create over 30 psi near the blast and goes outward, crushing buildings, people, etc. It is somewhat analogous to crushing pressure on objects deep in the ocean. And you may have seen a movie where the submarine goes to past this crushing depth and it kind of implodes inward and it starts bending the metal in the submarine, and if it gets deep enough, of course, it will implode. You may have seen that in movies. But the blast wave, this is the high velocity winds created by the overpressure and is given in miles per hour. This can create high velocity projectiles that are dangerous to humans, animals, plants, and buildings. Excuse me. These winds can cause all kinds of injuries due to flying debris. And here is an example of the blast wave and overpressure. We'll go back down to the 500 kiloton and 30 psi and 670 mile per hour winds. As you can see, that is definitely faster than a hurricane. And of course 30 psi will crush you, so at 1.1 mile it'll be enough. And as you see, 470 mile per hour at 20 psi, and then you have 15 psi at 1.6 miles, and at 2 miles you have 10 psi at 290 miles per hour. So you know, we haven't even hit hurricane miles per hour yet. 7 psi at 2.5 miles and 225 mile per hour, and then at 5 psi 160 miles per hour. And so you were right about in here. You're getting closer and closer to where you might actually survive. 3 psi and 116 mile per hour. Even though you know it's 116 miles per hour and 3 psi, there's going to be debris from way up here. Could be carried to 3.8 miles. So you're still at risk. So so even at 4.7 miles, you have 2 psi and 70 miles per hour. And if you're in a good spot, you might be able to survive that. And 8 miles is 1 psi and 48 miles per hour. So it'll blow in windows, it'll knock down buildings. In fact, I got a picture of that I don't know if that's next, but yeah, that's next. These are pictures of what happened to one of the buildings during a test, a nuclear explosion test. This demonstrates how much damage the pressure and winds can cause. So they had a house, at a particular distance, and the blast wave, of course, hits that, and overpressure hits that house and pushes everything outward. And as you can see, it's destroying everything, destroying the house almost completely. And at the end, there's not much left of the house. Even though the house was charred, it was actually burning a little bit, but it was burnt and charred. Most of the damage was caused by the overpressure and the blast wave. So you get almost a triple whammy here, probably even more than that. Probably all five of the effects right here was that well, it being a building, it doesn't die, so you don't. The initial and residual radiation and fallout ain't gonna hurt it, but the thermal energy in the blast wave and the overpressure just knocked that thing down. And that's kind of what will occur. And if there are, even if you had something heavy, a heavy vehicle or something like that, that will become picked off of the ground and thrown in the air, and so all of that is going on, and that's why I say the horrors of a nuclear war, because it does so much indiscriminate damage. It kills people indiscriminately. And these are the important types of blast. You're going to, the person who's going to be shooting a nuclear bomb toward another person or whatever, or another country, you're going to set that bomb to go off at a certain height. And this is broken up into the different heights. You have a high altitude burst, which will cause certain effects, air burst or surface burst or other. Okay, and a high altitude burst or a nuclear explosion above 100,000 feet is going to cause a high altitude burst and can cause an electromagnetic pulse over a large area. This causes a transistor to short out, which affects radios, computers, cars, and other electronic devices. The only way to protect those electronic equipment, probably not the only way, but you put them in a Faraday cage, can be used to help protect electronic equipment. You can purchase Faraday cage bags that you can place your electronic devices in, thus helping protect it. And of course, a high altitude burst is above 100,000 feet. Now, I bought some some of those bags, and I have, emergency radio and other things, other electronic equipments in those Faraday bags to help protect it from the EMP. But I'm close enough to a military base that I probably don't have to worry about that. I'm too close. Okay. But I do have, you can buy those Faraday cage bags, and I would suggest that you have like an emergency radio and actually a Geiger counter or whatever in these cages to, because you'll be needing that if you want any information from after a nuclear war. Okay, an airburst has a greater initial radiation as compared to a surface burst or a high altitude burst. Greater initial radiation, so there's going to be a lot of gamma radiation and X-rays given off. The bigger the difference between the fireball and the ground, the less amount of fallout there will be due to the smaller amount of material being sucked up into the mushroom cloud, or vaporized for that matter. Of course, that vaporized material is going to mix with other things and become fallout. So it'll be less. Higher air burst means there will be less radiation or fallout. So that's one good thing, if you can call it good, there will be less fallout. This is kind of a picture of a air burst. If you take from the center and take a radii from the center of the sphere, you will notice that the gamma burst and heat will spread out more compared to a surface burst. Okay, from here, just due to the line of sight, it's going to hit more farther. It'll be being able to go farther because none of that energy given off in the explosion will be absorbed into the ground or used in vaporizing ground. With the fireball not directly hitting the ground, the energy will be able to spread out more and turn less of the ground into gaseous radioactive material, thus creating less fallout. Okay, let's go to a surface burst. It causes a larger amount of fallout, causes a crater that will be left after the burst. A burst on the surface produces the greatest overpressure at very close ranges, but less overpressure than the air bursts at somewhat longer ranges. This is because more of the energy is being absorbed in the ground and directed downward rather than outward. Okay, here's an example. As you can see, this picture represents a ground burst. Notice that the energy from the burst is absorbed into the ground and directed toward the ground. So immediately underneath this fireball, which is no longer a fireball because of the fact that almost half of that seems to be on the ground, which means it's being, that ground right in there is going to be heated and vaporized and whatever. So the energy is being directed toward the ground, or absorbed into the ground, if you will, instead of being directed outward along the surface. So, given that, it will not most of the energy will be closer to the center. Okay, let's see if I explain that a little better by reading it. Notice that the energy from the burst is absorbed into the ground and directed toward the ground. In this type of burst, a lot of the material on the ground and the ground itself will be vaporized and become fallout. Also, a smaller amount of energy, but certainly not all, will be directed outward. But do not get me wrong, though. There is still a mass quantity of energy left to destroy objects far away from the initial burst, which makes the physics a little bit more complicated when it's like this one is so close to the ground. Okay, and this is an actual crater left from a nuclear explosion from a test, and is about a mile in diameter. So as you can see, that the ground took, you might put it this way, the ground took the brunt of the explosion. So there was less energy expanding outward. So the different types of blast effects, or the blast effects are going to be different than an airburst. So as you can see, like in the airburst, there won't be a crater because the energy will be pointed outward and not absorbed. Let me put it again. Let's see if I can put it. In airburst, the brunt is not absorbed by the ground. It is available to go outward through the air and hit objects a lot farther away from the center of the blast as compared to the surface burst. Other types of blast, okay, a water burst. It can cause a lot of steam, and when cooled, it will come down as radioactive rain. If exploded deep in the ocean away from a port, it can cause a large tsunami. And this is what Russia threatened the United States with this type of blast, saying that they could fire this thing for thousands of miles away, and that 100 megaton nuclear explosion will go thousands of miles and go right close to a port, and it can be exploded and cause a large tsunami. Now, if you ask me, I don't see the point, but this is what they threatened not that long ago, was to cause large tsunamis. But 100 megaton bomb, I mean, What are you worried about causing a tsunami for when 100,000 megaton, 100 megaton explosion is going to be enormous anyway? So I don't think it's very practical. I mean, whatever. But they did threaten that. An underground burst. There is a treaty preventing above ground testing due to the spreading of radioactive all over the world and other hazards. And that was shown in Chernobyl and Fukushima, that the radioactivity that was in the air went around the world. So there is also a ban on underground detonations. Now everything is simulated and theoretical. So the only way to really advance your nuclear bombs is to simulate it on a computer, and you don't really get to test it. So there's and things that aren't tested can are at a greater risk of not working. So that's something, you know. MIRVs. MIRVs are multiple independent targetable re-entry vehicles, or MIRVs. In other words, it's an ICBM that carries multiple warheads that can hit different targets. There are also decoys on the missile used to make the odds of destroying an actual bomb less likely. That increases the chance that a bomb will actually hit the target. Because of the new missile defense systems, if you have these multiple independent target re-entry vehicles coming in, and there's 10 of them, and say 5 of them are actual bombs, you're gonna try to hit all 10 of them. So that increases the chance that one of those are going to get through, or maybe none of them. But statistically, you know, an actual nuclear bomb will get through. So it makes it harder for the missile defense systems to protect. So, and this is a picture of a MIRV. What a scary thought. Yeah, that's a scary thought. Just think of we may not have as many ICBMs, but when they're putting like 10 of 2 nuclear bombs or 8 nuclear bombs on them, you know, you still got pretty much close to what you had. So you are kind of putting more eggs in one basket, but with with odds are that they'll probably actually hit, and you know. Section 3, radiation detectors. These are pictures of my radiation detectors. Notice that 2 of them are electronic and 1 is not. This is a Geiger counter, it's a Geiger-Muller counter. It uses a Geiger-Muller tube, and I'll discuss that a little bit. I got a diagram of that. And this has one of those Geiger-Muller tubes in it too, as well. But it's small enough you can connect it to your key, use it as a keychain, so you can carry it with you. I have it clicked to my belt, to a belt loop, so I carry this with me wherever I go. But mine's getting pretty old, so it may not be as accurate. This one is a Rad Triage 50, it says, and it pretty much is giving you, if you put that in your wallet, um, it's going to tell you how much radiation or a ballpark figure of what you're being zapped with. Um, but uh, like I've said, this is not electronic. You can put it in your wallet, you can take it with you wherever, so you have some idea how much radiation you're getting. You could take this with you. It is electronic, so an EMP would knock that out. This is electronic. However, I have that in one of those Faraday bags, so hopefully it might survive and be able to give you actual readings of what the radioactivity is in my vicinity. Okay, this is a conversion table, and uh, like a lot of things, we had our own units that we measured radioactivity in, and English units, and okay, now that we have pretty much standardized the what you measure in, then a lot of the counters in America will give you the old readings and the new readings. So, yeah, like British units, we haven't technically gone. What is it? A metric in the United States. So, scientists have, yeah, we have, but not the general population. So can be a certain amount of confusion due to the units. And here's some of the conversion units that you can use to convert to whatever you need. So why do you need a detector? You need to be able to detect the amount of radiation being given off to determine how much radiation you have received or how much you are going to receive when you leave your shelter. This knowledge can save your life and the life of your loved ones by telling you when you have reached harmful or lethal doses. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. That some of that, like that card I had, it's a ballpark figure. So an actual Geiger counter will give you an actual reading and is probably more accurate than anything else. The types of detectors, and there are a number of different types of detectors, radiation detectors, and they are also called dosimeters that you can choose from with different costs. Okay, keep that word in dosimeters because it's a meter that gives you an idea of the dose. So that's another word for a radiation detector. Your detector should be able to detect gamma rays and X-rays since they are the most dangerous you might be exposed to. However, X-rays are not continually given off, so they do not hang around, thus not something to be continually worried about. You will have to worry about X-rays in the initial blast, but you won't have to worry about them after that. The cheapest and most common way to detect radiation is an instrument that uses a Geiger-Müller tube. And I will tell you there's other ways of detecting radiation, but that is the one that they use in these devices. And you might even go on the YouTube and see some of those vapor clouds. I think those vapor clouds are neat, but I don't think you can carry one of those around with you, but you can probably build that into a device. But the way these Geiger-Müller tubes works are more adaptable to an instrument. You want at least one detector or dosimeter to be non-electric because of the EMP. Okay, that's a given. However, how do you get a detector that's not electronic? Well, in Nuclear War Survival Skills by Crescent H. Kearney, the book contains his directions on how to build a homemade Kearney fallout meter which requires no electricity and can be built, generally speaking, from materials in your home. However, there is one item in that that I don't have in my home, and that's mainly because of we don't have a lot of sewing stuff, and the thread that's used in the Kearney fallout meter is it's a nylon thread. It's a clear nylon thread, and I think that's you don't normally use that in sewing. I don't think that's in our sewing kit or whatever. So I've ordered that through Amazon specifically. So you can also buy a Rad Triage 50 and a Nuke Alert from Amazon.com, and potassium iodide for you is another place, which is KI4 and then U.com. And they probably they've been around a long time. I mean, that's where I've gotten the FEMA put out information about what they thought was from the 80s, what places would be attacked, and they made maps from you could find those on potassium iodide for you, or they have links. I don't know if they still have them on there, but they did, and I've downloaded that information, and some of it's inaccurate now, some of it is accurate, and some of it I can guess where some of the new targets would be, but it's not as accurate, but it'll give you an idea where, so I don't take it with a grain of salt. This is what a Kearney fallout meter might look like. These were pre-made, and they're not cheap, so you are it'd be a lot cheaper probably to make them. But they used to sell them. They might be hard. They're kind of hard to get now, and they are expensive. I think I saw some for about $50 up to $75. And I don't think I'd pay $75 for one of these things when I can make it probably a lot cheaper. All you really have to do is make sure you have that nylon thread, and of course there's there you print the directions, and you cut out the certain things from the directions, and you put that around your can and so forth, etc. So if you, I'd read it off the internet, and I would make it. I wouldn't spend that much money on when you can make it. You can probably buy the nylon thread, so from Amazon or something, or you might have that in your sewing kit already. But here's basically what a Geiger-Muller tube is measuring. Your gamma radiation comes in. You have a cathode and an anoid, and it causes current to come through here. And depending on the amount of gamma radiation, the bigger the current will be. So, and thus you get a readout. So that's how that works. But then again, you know, if I remember right, when I learned some of this stuff, that some of these have limitations, and I think the limitation of this type of counting was that in large doses of gamma rays, that this this counter doesn't work as well. So so you can keep that in mind, is to read the information that comes with your meter. Okay, and we're going to talk about some of the units right now. Curie is from Madame Curie and her husband. And becquerel, and that is the amount of activity. And I've always called that, I called that a rotogen, but I think the actual word for that is a Rinkin. And I've heard Rinkin used, so you got to watch how you're pronouncing it to actually understand, you know, what they're saying. I mean, if they're saying Rinkin and you thinking rotogen, you know, you're not going to put one and one together. So, and it's designated by an R, capital R, and that's amount of exposure. Rad or gray is the amount of absorbed dose, and RIM or a sievert is the equivalent dose. I'll tell you right now that most of these meters are going to give you the Rinkin or the sievert. Excuse me. My GMC 320 plus radiation detector can give me Rinkins per hour or sieverts per hour, in which I can look up in the table to see what possible damage to my body will be. Okay, and I have a table of, it's not really well, it's kind of a table. It lists the amount of radiation that might be given off, and some of the possible symptoms, or possibly, I guess, what your damage is going to be. But we'll get into that when I actually get there. But I do have to get ahead of myself. Amount of exposure is Rinkin is the unit used to express the amount of gamma radiation exposure an individual receives. It is the cumulative gamma radiation exposure. In other words, if you are exposed to 50 Roentgens 1 hour and 25 Roentgens a different hour, you have to add those together and you are actually exposed to 75 Roentgens. So when you look that up on a table or whatever, you look up to 75 Roentgens and not 50 or 25. So you have to add those up together. An absorbed dose relates to the different types of radiation, alpha, beta, gamma, to the energy they impart into a body of materials. And you're not really going to, this is more of a physics, or yeah, I would consider it a physics thing. 1 gray is equal to 1 joule per kilogram. And 1/100th of a rad is equal to 1 joule per kilogram. You can convert it to that, but I don't think your meter will give you those. So this is just for information right here. Equivalent dose is a unit of measurement that relates the dose of any radiation to the biological effect of that dose. The equivalent dose is equal to absorbed dose by the radiation weighted factor. Okay, and more or less is this is what you need to know, that different tissues are more or less susceptible to radiation. Your lungs will be more susceptible to radiation than, say, your skin exposed to the same amount of radiation. So the weighted factor will be larger for lungs than for skin. Okay, so if you were to calculate the equivalent dose, then this is how you would do it. And depending on where, which organ was irradiated or whatever, then you would use a different weighted factor for that particular one, and you'll get an equivalent dose. And what this is usually like 10 or 20. So in certain tissues or organs, you'll have to multiply by 10 or by 20. Because of the certain organs or tissue is more susceptible than other tissues. Now the interpretation. You need to be able to relate what units your detector gives to something meaningful. Yeah, you're not just doing this for the intellectual fun or whatever. If your detector gives, you're trying to use this information to determine whether or not you go out or whatever. And let's read what it says. If your detector gives you Roentgens per hour or sieverts per hour, what does that mean? Am I going to be sick or really sick or even die? Can I leave my shelter or will it kill me? There are different tables and different units to relate the amount of radiation to the risk. And that's what we're going to talk about in the 4th section is risk. We will be going over the risk. Okay, well, I said the same thing. We will be going over the risk in the next section. Okay, we're on section 4. Our risks, biological effects, and protection. Okay. Now of course, you want to know where those nuclear bombs are going to land. And we have a triad, and Russia has a triad. So if we were ever to go at it, then the missiles from a submarine are going to reach, since they're closer, since they're theoretically closer, then they're only going to take 5 to 10 minutes. And the ICBMs are going to be farther away. They're in Russia or they're in the United States, and we have to send them over there, and they have to send them over here. So they take about 20 minutes once they shoot them off, to 20 minutes to 30 minutes to reach here. Okay, bombers are going to take longer because just because, they have to fly from Russia to the United States, but some of those bombers are pretty fast. But you're going to get bombs dropped from a bomber up to 2 hours or so. Remember, even if a nuclear bomb is going off at a particular city or a particular site, that there's redundancy, and that there might also be another one being fired at the same place from an ICBM or from a bomber. So you have to wait. You have to wait for a little while, or even a day or so, before they might, and I got quote signs up, before they might stop firing those things or dropping those things. So you definitely want to be in a shelter, and you want to stay in your shelter. And if you're somewhere that is reasonably safe, stay there. Where are they going to attack? Okay, primary targets are what are they going to shoot at first? They're going to shoot at first our ICBM sites, airports that are long enough for bombers, major military installations, and major cities. Okay, we're talking, as far as major cities, major industrial cities like Houston, Dallas, New York City, Los Angeles, or whatever. They just, believe it or not, Russia's newscast on Russian TV said they were going to basically shoot New York City, Washington, D.C., and then something on the West Coast, either San Francisco or Los Angeles. I forget what they listed, but they listed a few sites that they were going to shoot nuclear bombs at, which, they sure have threatened us a lot lately. So it causes tension between the two countries, and it's not a way to get along. Some of the secondary, more major cities, or some of those was a major city, but it's not necessarily one of those large cities, and then ports and remaining military sites. So now you're talking about, in the first one, the primary, you're talking about communication centers like Cheyenne Mountain and other places that are communication sites or whatever. And then thirdly, everywhere else. So what you want to keep in mind is to leave the cities. It is your best guess, so choose wisely. I would like to be at least 100 miles from any potential target. That's true, but if you're 100 miles away from a target, there's not, you're going to be next to another target. So it's kind of hard to do. So how long do I shelter? Of course, nobody knows for sure due to, it depends. Like I said earlier, it depends. Plus, you know, plus you don't know for sure where they're going to shoot at, and um, the rule of thumb is every 7 hours the radioactivity should decrease by 10%. That's the rule of thumb. So every 7 hours, uh, if you have 100, if you have 100 Rincons, and you measure it right now, and then in 7 hours it should be 10. So it decreased by 10%. So, okay, that's how you would. But then, that rule of thumb isn't very helpful if you don't have readings. So, uh, given that information, they calculate, they expect it to, or you can wait in your shelter for 2 weeks. And they expect the radioactivity to be low enough in 2 weeks. But, that it depends, like I've said, of how close you are, whether you're downwind and getting lots and lots of fallout, um, or if you're next to a number of uh, targets and you have a lot of nuclear bombs that explode in your area, then that depends too. Uh, okay, and of course that, or use your radiation detector to determine how long, the most accurate. That's because you can get a reading of how much radiation is in your particular area at a particular time, and you don't have to rely on somebody saying that there is radiation in, say, way off, and because whatever you're going to pick up on your radio is probably not going to be in your area, and it's not going to be accurate if they tell you that this is how much radiation or so. So the best bet is to have your own radiation detector and to be determine how much is in your area. And it depends from the of how close you are and so forth, etc. But if anything, wait in your shelter for 2 weeks. And then hopefully when you come out of that shelter in 2 weeks, if you have no detector or no information or no nothing, then in 2 weeks, maybe you have enough food for 2 weeks. Maybe you won't. Maybe you only have it for 3 days. And when you come out of that shelter, and your risk is going to go up. 3 days, um, because of it'd still probably be high. Um, Protection of major biological systems. Okay, this is your exterior. Cover yourself and keep dust off your skin. You don't want any fallout on your skin. And if it does get, duct tape the ends of your pants and your shirt so fallout will not get in that way. It'll not get in there and be in there, so that when you take off your clothes, the fallout will hopefully be on the clothes, and you'll take it off of the clothes, and you'll not continually be exposed to the fallout. Now, if it gets into your respiratory system, that's a whole different ball game. Cover your mouth and nose with a shirt or handkerchief, but it's best to use a P100 mask or NBC gas mask. Well, I don't have an NBC gas mask myself. I have a P100 mask, and that's a pretty good. It keeps particles and stuff out, and even keeps certain gases out. So that's the best I can do due to my budget. But you could use a shirt or a handkerchief if you have nothing. You want something, so use something. And like I said, the respiratory system, your lungs, and whatever your digestive system are more susceptible to, excuse me, to radiation. So ingestion, you can clean off the packaging of fallout, and then you can eat the contents of the packaged food or bottled water. Now, filter water of radioactive particles if from outside sources. You'll want to filter the water. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is filter the water before you put it on your plants or whatever, or you use to clean yourself or something like that. But and you definitely don't want to drink it without being filtered. But if it's bottled or if it's in packaging, then the fallout don't make the food on the inside radioactive. All you got to do is remove the fallout from the exterior with the packaging, and then you can eat or drink the water safely. Thyroid. It's another thing susceptible to radiation is your thyroid. Take iodine tablets, but remember, it will not protect much else but the thyroid. So even though you have thyroid tablets in there, it's not going to help anything else. So keep that in mind, because if someone tells you to protect yourself from radiation, use iodine tablets. That's not the. You got to use all of these to protect yourself from the radiation, not just iodine tablets. And I want to make that very clear. Okay. This is a sign that was used to designate a shelter that could be used as a fallout shelter. However, did not designate that it would protect from other effects of blast. You might see older buildings with these fallout shelter signs on it. And you can, if there's an exchange, a nuclear exchange, then you could probably go into one of these and help protect yourself from fallout. But that's all they protect you from. Shelters. Bert the Turtle says duck and cover. I remember those. There was a commercial that stated that caught out in the open, then get to the lowest point or behind something and duck and cover. And that's the same thing you would do in a fire, is you would duck and cover and, cover yourself or something. But that's one way of protecting yourself, is if you're caught out in the open. Another way to protect or you can use as a shelter is the basement. Basements make great shelters since the earth and walls have a tendency to block radiation. They do suggest that you build a room inside the middle of the basement with concrete blocks to get the best protection. So ahead of time, you can build inside your basement a shelter, and that is a better way of protecting because you are putting more stuff between you and the radiation. Okay, shelters using buildings. Buildings marked with a fallout shelter symbol provides some protection in a pinch. They are not usually long-term solutions, and you may have to leave them to get where there may be food and water and better protection. They say that if you are in a tall building that does survive, then staying in the middle of the building and halfway up is best. You avoid radiation from the ground and from the top of the building. Okay. Digging, if you're giving a day's worth of warning, digging a shelter in your backyard. There are many floor plans available in books or on the internet for building a shelter in your backyard that should not take a lot of time to build except for a couple of days. You would have to plan for what effects the shelter will need to protect you from your given location. And of course, what I'm saying is that if you're close enough, you need to watch out for thermal radiation, initial radiation, those other things, blast and whatever. Most of these shelters that you dig in the background at this point, I mean, if you're only given it says a couple of days, but some of these could be built in a couple of hours, but they're only good for protecting you against fallout, not so much anything else. So if you really have some time, then digging a shelter and making it with concrete blocks or other things that will protect you, then this is the difference between one type of shelter and another type of shelter, and you can get better shelters, plans for better shelters off of the internet, or and if you have time to do it beforehand, of course. Building an off-site shelter. Building a shelter off-site where there may not be high concentrations of fallout is another option. And I'm sure I go into more detail there. If it is engineered properly, it can protect you from fallout and looters. It is also useful if you could design it to fit your family needs. This would probably be best just for that reason. However, remember, getting there might be a problem. Depending on how far away it is, remember, you got to get from point A to point B, and you're going to be exposed to fallout in between, or you're going to have to walk, or something like that. Remember, the cars are have a lot of transistors in them, so your car may not work. So don't make it too far away. Make sure you'll be able to get there. And then I have a note here. Every family is different. You have to take into account the cost and ideal place for these shelters. The idea is if you can build a shelter before you need it, you can stock it up with supplies and put the features in it that will make it more comfortable for your entire family. It also gives you an opportunity to build using good materials and not something that is subpar and in a pinch. You have to be careful about using a shelter that was designated a shelter 50 years ago, though. The bombs have gotten bigger and more destructive, so what worked in the past may not be adequate now. There are many plans on the internet and in books, so you can find one that fits you and your family. Or you can have an engineer design you one. If you're an engineer, even better. Okay, harmful or lethal doses. Less than 200 Rinkins, you have a chance for radiation poisoning. These are the risks, or the odds. Between 200 Rinkins and 800 Rinkins, you're likely to get radiation poisoning, and there is a chance for death. Okay, greater than 800 Rinkins, there is a likelihood of death, but even that is not guaranteed. And I've got a note here saying these are estimates are based on no medical intervention. Different sources give different values, so these are my ballpark figures. 800 Rinkins is between 6 and 10 sieverts. Following is a table I found on the internet. Okay, and as you see, these are in sieverts. They're not in Rinkins. So whatever this type of table you have here is going to mean you're going to take readings in sieverts per hour or whatever and add them up over the different hours, and this gives you millisieverts. So 1 sievert is around in here. So 1 sievert is mild radiation sickness, headache, risk of infection, light radiation poison, mild to moderate nausea, fatigue, 10% risk of death after 30 days is 1 and 2. And as it goes up, it gives you 50% risk of death after 30 days for 3 to 4 sieverts. So, and as you go up, so, as far as the 6 to 10 sieverts here, nearly 100% fatality after 14 days. So, these are some of your risks. How much risk? What are some of the symptoms? And so forth in this particular table. And I have a chart around here somewhere that I purchased, and I don't think they're in sieverts. I think they're in rads. So I have a different table that I go by. Symptoms. The symptoms are dependent on your current health before the exposure. Dependent on the amount of exposure, you can get sick, then well, and then sick again, which is called the latent phase, due to the damage of the bone marrow and other factors. So try and be prepared for that second bout and be patient of others. This type of event is obviously going to take a toll on you psychologically as well as physically. The stress is going to affect everybody differently, so things can get unhinged, is how I put it. Given that death is not guaranteed, do not jump to conclusions. In other words, don't be quick to euthanize somebody. Early radiation sickness, these are some of the symptoms. You get nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, anorexia, burns, and skin irritation, and that's that sunburn that I was talking about. Hair loss, malaise, fatigue. Oh, this is late radiation. This is after you've gotten sick, gotten well, and are now sick again. You get malaise, fatigue, drowsiness, weight loss, fever, abdominal pain, insomnia, restlessness, blisters, spontaneous abortion, and possible death. Okay, this is severe radiation sickness, is excitability, lack of coordination, breathing difficulty, occasion periods of disorientation, and death. So what happens is it destroys it damages your nervous system. So you're going to have nervous system problems, and then you will pass. So a timetable for symptoms. It is hard to determine the exact time of symptoms because everybody is different and your dose will be different. Your body is great about repairing itself, but if the dose is high enough, it will kill the cells in your bone marrow that produce your RBCs, WBCs, and platelets. That's red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And the reduction in platelet causes bleeding. The reduction in WBCs or white cells means you will be susceptible to illnesses, and the reduction in RBCs will cause anemia and breathing problem because less RBCs means less oxygen getting to your cells. Okay, the science of protection is time, is the duration of exposure, the distance from the source of radiation, and shielding. It is the amount of material between you and the source of the radiation. And this gives you an example of some shielding. You have a alpha radiation and is stopped by paper. You have beta radiation, so it goes through the paper but is stopped by aluminum. So it don't take a whole lot to block beta radiation, but look at the gamma. The gamma will go through paper, will go through aluminum, and it will be blocked to some extent by lead, but some of it will get through. So depending on the width of that will give you more protection if you have a bigger width. This is the penetration power of different radiations. Time. The amount of radioactivity will decrease with time, so the longer you can spend in the shelter, the better. The smaller your shelter is, the harder it will be to stay in your shelter. So having games or books will help you pass the time. So the longer you can stay away from the higher doses of radiation, the better you will be. And if you have a shelter, hopefully it has food and is big enough for you to be able to stay in there for a long time. The distance. The farther away from the blast you are, the more likely the lesser amount of fallout will be in your area. Remember, the heavier or more radioactive fallout will fall closer to the blast, but you still do not want to be downwind of the blast. That means the wind is blowing the radiation towards you. The closer you are to the blast, the more you have to worry about overpressure and thermal radiation. So you have to plan your shelter accordingly. So the closer you are to it, the worse the radiation will do to your body. The longer you spend next to it, the worse your damage will be. Time, distance. The more shelter you have, the more material you have between you and the radiation, the more radiation it'll block. Shielding. Generally speaking, the thicker and denser the material, the better the protection. Put as much material as you can between you and the radiation. You can download or find floor plans to build shelters. Tornado shelters are better than nothing, and since I live where you do not have basements, tornado shelters are better than nothing, and since I live where we do not have basements, will work in a pinch. Okay, a tornado shelter will work in a pinch, but they can be closer to the surface of the Earth. Remember, the more Earth you have on top of your shelter, the better the distance between the fallout and the in your body will be. So tornado shelters will work. Basements will work. And so forth. I discussed some of that earlier. Remember, it is too late after a war. You can't you have to find something real quick. You're not as likely to find something that will protect you very well. Materials used for making shelters: wood, aluminum, earth, concrete, and steel. Diet. You should keep a large bottle of vitamins in your kit. Take them when you eat whatever it is you have to eat to prevent stomach upset. Vitamins can help prevent things like scurvy, etc. Make sure your vitamins also have iron for the production of RBCs. And we're assuming that it has B12 and folate in that already. Most vitamins have that, but only the women's vitamins usually have the iron. So if you're buying men's vitamins, then you probably don't have iron in it and will need to buy an extra thing of a supplement of iron. So, or you can buy a female vitamin. If you're vomiting and have diarrhea, you will be losing your electrolytes more quickly. So the electrolytes need to be replaced. And that could cause problems real quick if you're vomiting and having diarrhea. So drink plenty of fluids that contain no alcohol, and preferably electrolytes like Gatorade, baby water, etc. So if you plan ahead, you can buy things you might need in this situation. And more than likely, a lot of us will get a mild case of radiation sickness to worse. So having a drink with like Gatorade, like I have Gatorade powder or something like that, or if you have baby water, I believe you can buy the baby water with electrolytes. That helps them when they're having diarrhea and vomiting, or usually it's just diarrhea. You also need to grow some food for yourself. You will need some non-hybrid seeds. I keep mine in the freezer because they last a few years that way. Otherwise, rotate them annually. You should grow them inside to avoid contamination with fallout. Remember to use filtered water when watering them so they will not uptake the radiation with the water and nutrients. Okay, that's when you come out of your shelter. If you have a greenhouse or you can build one, that will work best, because it keeps that out of the environment. It keeps a barrier between the fallout and your plants. That will help you keep radioactive rain off of your food. And the oxygen vegetables are very good to help fight cancer. During your confinement, you could read a book on gardening to help pass the time if you do not know how to. Growing food before requiring it is best, so you can get the experience. And of course, anything you can practice before you need it is always better. Medicinal plants and herbs. Since it may be difficult to get medicine for a while, I would suggest that you have some knowledge or slash books about medicinal plants and herbs. It may be too dangerous to go to the cities where the pharmacies would be because of radiation or gangs. Prescription medicine is best than the plants or herbs, so you have to weigh the risks and the risk of going away from your shelter to a pharmacy and actually being able to grow your own medicinal plants and herbs. I would try the plants or herbs out before you rely on them by buying them now and trying them. This gives you a chance to make sure you're not allergic to them and that they will work for you. I had a problem with some of these plants and herbs actually make me constipated. So, so you have to weigh that too. I have also looked mine up on at least 2 sources to make sure the information is at least the same. When you think you have found a good herb or plant, then you have to order the seeds by genus species, and once again make sure they're not hybrids. Know what you are growing and eating. Another reason for learning about gardening. Okay, for diseases, antibiotics would be nice to have in your kit, but not always possible. Medicinal plants and herbs may not always work. The best way to keep disease down is to keep up with your sanitation. You can keep your waste in trash bags until full and then throw them outside your shelter. You should bury the bags once it's safe to go outside. Also, you have to use some of your precious water to clean yourself. It can help you from getting infections. I have baby wipes in my kit to help keep me clean for a little while, and bars of soap for later in my kit. You should remember that outdoor water sources may contain a lot of radioactive, so be careful where you choose to bathe. Okay, this is section 5, my summary. Nuclear war would not be isolated. Radiation would cover the globe. It would cause hardships for everyone living on the planet. Even if it started off between 2 adversaries, it could lead for others to get involved. For instance, if any country attacks a NATO country, then other NATO countries have agreed that that is an attack on them, thus leading them into the battle. The countries that have nuclear weapons also would probably use them or lose them. There is also a large number of nuclear weapons between the nuclear states, enough that would probably make this planet uninhabitable. Mutual assured destruction, or MAD, is definitely not a guarantee to keep the nuclear weapons from being launched, because the threat from terrorists is very real and would cause nuclear retaliation. Also, there has been a few times, due to one reason or another, that they came very close to shooting them off by accident. Well, it wasn't by accident, but they were getting the wrong information. Like, for instance, a sensor was bad in a computer and was giving false information about us being attacked, and we came very close to shooting our nuclear weapons off. So, you know, there's always a risk. So Cuban Missiles Crisis could have led to nuclear war as well, or something. I believe the 1980 something, there was a NATO practice, and I think Russia believed we were actually planning on launching nuclear bombs, and they were close to shooting them off. So, you know, it's always it always can happen, and it always can happen by accident as well, or by some unfortunate an event, or misinformation is probably a better way of saying that. Even if there is only a few that were launched, the pain and suffering is unimaginable. It causes permanent physical and emotional wounds, and the effects last for many generations. So that one act of anger could have lasting effects on mankind. It is a scary topic, and it is depressing just thinking about it. However, it is a possibility and should not be dismissed. One good thing is, if you are prepared for nuclear exchange, then you are probably prepared for many other types of earth-shattering events, including a nuclear meltdown of the nuclear power plant. The radiation is nearly the same, and so is the protection. The main thing to worry about is radioactive steam being released. So take heart and be prepared. Okay, now in this document, in this presentation, I have a list of 72-hour emergency kit. This is in my backpack. I have this number of things in my backpack. And you can go down and you can see what my I got N95 mask, but I got something else. This is a P100 mask, but these are some of the other things you can do. In my car, I have, in my trunk of my car, I have different things, and these are the references that these are some of the books I've read that actually taught me the information that I just shared with you. So you can look at this and get more. Okay, and when I'm saying this is at my website, http backslash, well, actually it's // colon, okay, wait, I did that wrong, but okay, at my website, www.rgreatideas, and R is OUR, not ARE, so it's rgreatideas.org, and you can go to the radiation page and you can download this presentation. It's in this is going to be an MP4 format. You can download it and watch it anytime you feel like it. The actual document is a LibreOffice Impress document, which could be converted to a PowerPoint, and there's also a PDF. So there are many ways to read, watch, or get this information. So you can either go to that website and get that information, or you can watch this MP4 over and over, and until you feel like you've got all this information down. So at here, I think I'll end my presentation.